Welcome to the second episode of the DFIR Report podcast, where we break down our latest reports based on real-world intrusions and discuss the investigation and analysis steps. I'm your host, Kostas, and today we're diving into our most recent report, From OneNote to RansomNote, an Ice Cold Intrusion. This report sheds light on a stealthy intrusion that stays dormant for a long time before striking. But first, let's meet the brilliant minds who brought this report to light. We have with us Alex, Rick, and Randy, the analysts and authors who pieced together the breadcrumbs left by adversaries. How are you guys doing today?
Doing very well, thanks, Costa.
Yeah,
very happy to have you here. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here with us. And to add an extra layer to our discussion from the perspective of the reader, we have Spencer here with us. Thank you for being with us, Spencer.
Hey, Kostas. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Very happy to have you here. I'm looking forward to your insights and especially with your background to pen testing. This will be fun. Before we delve into this intrusion, I'd love for our guests to introduce themselves a little bit, sharing a bit about their background and perhaps a sneak peek into which part of the investigation they found most interesting. Maybe we can start with Alex.
Yeah, my name is Alex. I've been helping out within the DFIR report for around 3 years now. And on a daily basis, I work as a incident response consultant. With regards to interesting aspects of the report, I think it's nice that we have from A to Z, so from initial access to ransom in this case.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Alex. Rick?
Hey everyone, my name is Rick. I have a background mostly in incident response and recently moved into a more threat intelligence role. Been with the report for a year, I think, almost. This is my second report, so like it a lot. And I think for this specific report is at some point we discovered, maybe a small sneak peek, is that some of the domains got taken over by a big company. So let's discuss that also, I think.
For sure, yeah. We will discuss that. Definitely, it was very interesting. And Randy?
Thank you. I started my career and spent the vast majority of the years in security doing digital forensics with a focus on attribution. And in the last several years, I've moved into proactive threat hunting and detection engineering. I have to say that brings me a lot of joy because rather than dealing with disasters after they've happened and just trying to figure out who's responsible, I really enjoy the feeling of proactively protecting people and watching all of the attacks bounce off or fail, or at least be detected very quickly. My favorite part of this report was that we got an unusual piece of information, and that's the files that the threat actor was interested in, what they were browsing. We don't always get that in incident response, but when we do, it gives us some insight into what they care about, but it also gives us a great opportunity to plan decoys or tripwires that we might want to put as active defense into an environment later.
Yeah, that was very interesting. And when this happens, it's always interesting to see exactly the steps that they took and what they did, having interactive access as well. So we will dive into that too. Hopefully we'll be able to cover everything. Maybe we can hear from Spencer too. How about you, Spencer?
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Looking forward to chatting. So I've got a help desk / sysadmin background, so I'm very familiar with internal networks, Active Directory, and things like that. It's kind of the world I come from. So a long time in IT, and then transitioned to security about 10 years ago, doing security at a financial institution. Kind of in charge of security there, and then eventually got into consulting where I started doing pen testing. And kind of breaking Active Directory is now my main forte. So I specialize in internal pen testing, assume breach, Windows Active Directory, all that stuff is kind of my jam now. And one of the things that I think was most interesting to me about this report was that I felt like it was a threat actor that was kind of looking over my shoulder on my pen tests sometimes, because we have, finding passwords in file shares and, other things like that. We have some stuff with domain admins, and just as a precursor to the conversation, a lot of interesting stuff that I commonly do and use and see on internal pen tests. So it's nice to see that the techniques that I'm using are kind of paralleled in the real world, so to speak, so that I can kind of emulate those threats for clients and help them defend and get better at that. So that was part of the most interesting thing for me.
Interesting that you touched on emulation, and I have some questions a little bit later on that topic. And yeah, I'm very, very happy to have you here today. Thank you very much for coming in. Let's take a quick break and learn how the DFIR report can help businesses combat these threats. We'll be back to our podcast shortly after this.
The DFIR report provides a range of services, including private threat briefs, which include 50 plus private reports annually. Another service we provide is our threat feed, which specializes in tracking command and control frameworks such as Cobalt Strike, Metasploit, Sliver, and more. We also offer a private rule set that consists of exclusively curated rules using insights derived from private threat briefs and other internal cases. We invite you to reach out for a personalized demo of our services via our Contact Us page.
Thank you for introducing yourselves, everyone. We have a highly experienced and knowledgeable group with us today. So let's dive into this report. Let's start by going over the initial foothold of Iced ID. We will later explore the techniques that threat actors used. And finally, we will talk about exfiltration and the deployment of the ransomware. Maybe we can start with Alex. The report begins with a phishing campaign utilizing Microsoft OneNote files, a method that's seen a surge in popularity among threat actors at the time of the intrusion. Can you walk us through how the initial breach was executed and the significance of choosing OneNote files for this attack?
As Kostas mentioned, in this intrusion, the threat actors gained initial access through a malicious OneNote document. And this generally includes a malicious script attached within the OneNote document, which the threat actors try to fool the user into clicking and executing. And of course, in this case, the goal of the malicious attachment was to load Iced ID onto the system. And overall, OneNote is generally, I guess you can consider it more of a fileless approach. So you're not necessarily sending a executable or a DLL to the victim, and yes, in general, more chances of flying under the radar. And I think overall, this trend of OneNote initial access became popular over the last year or two after Microsoft announced it would disable macros by default from documents downloaded from the internet. And in general, I think it's interesting to continue seeing threat actors turning to alternate methods of gaining footholds into systems.
Yeah, exactly. This is a good point, because we see threat actors keeping up with new methods, and as the previous methods are mitigated, they're just jumping on to the next thing. And it's interesting to see how fast they are able to pivot between those TTPs. I think it was in February and March of 2023. Those were the 2 months that this technique was used by multiple different campaigns out there. And yeah, it was, I think it was 2 months later, I think in May of 2023, where Microsoft came up with a mitigation. They made a change where OneNote blocks users from directly opening embedded files with a dangerous extension, and instead shows them a dialog that says something in lines of this action has been blocked, or your administrator has blocked this action, or something like that. It's interesting to see how Microsoft has mitigated it, and I feel for Microsoft, maybe this is a fast turnaround as well. It's very nice to see interesting TTPs, but that we don't see at the moment, but they caused a big problem back then. So moving on, after establishing the initial foothold, the malware lies dormant, only beaconing out. Randy, the waiting time was 21 days of silence before the threat actors took action. Does this tell us anything about the attackers? Why do you think the delay?
That's an excellent question. And I did form some theories as I was going through this investigation about what the cause might be. I think the two theories that made the most sense to me are, number one, that it could be an initial access broker. Initial access brokers frequently just focus on getting a foothold, establishing persistence, and doing a little bit of discovery so that they know what type of environment they have and what level of access they have. As I've done threat intelligence research, I've seen many of these initial access brokers, as they're getting into their business, as they're trying to establish a name for themselves, post on criminal forums more openly and publicly. They still are somewhat restricted, but I consider those public posts when they just say, hey, if anybody wants to buy this access, I have domain admin, it's on environment with this many Windows servers, this many workstations, and a company in such and such a country that has this revenue. So they basically outline how valuable they think this access would be, and then they wait for a buyer, and it might be a long time before somebody buys it. The other reason that it could be a delay is, even if the person who did the initial access was planning to use it themselves, if they had a wildly successful campaign, they only have a few operators for dozens of intrusions going on. It's just a matter of workload, how quick they are at getting to something, and if they recognize the value of the different environments that they've intruded into, they might choose to prioritize the big ones that they think are going to be a big payday first. And they might deprioritize smaller victim companies, hoping that it'll still be around when they get to it. So either one of those would explain it, but I think my bet would be on the initial access broker. It just took a while to sell this one.
Yeah, this is a very interesting insight that in many cases there are different groups that are involved. So I think what you're hypothesizing here, I think makes very much sense, and it's a great insight, and for people that are not aware with the criminal marketplace and how this malware gaining initial access and then selling their access to third parties. Thank you very much, Randy. I want to ask Spencer, before we move on from the initial access and the execution phase, is there anything that you found abnormal or interesting? Are those TTPs used in real world cases by pen testers to emulate attackers? And maybe do customers that know about these type of techniques, are they requested them from you to emulate it in their environments?
Yeah, so from a pen test perspective, a lot of times we're doing very specific types of engagements. Like we're doing an internal pen test, we're doing an external, we're doing a web app, mobile, things like that. A lot of our customers or a lot of our clients who kind of come to us have those specific needs. And sometimes social engineering and phishing is in scope, and sometimes it isn't. So it really depends on the clients and their needs. That being said, I feel like initial access is one of those very specialized areas where it's a cat and mouse game too, to get actual execution on the host and and bypass email filters and things like that. So it would make sense to me that there is these initial access brokers, right, that have these very specialized skills that keep up with trends, that keep up with detections, and keep up with what they need to do to get access to the environment, and then sell that off. But customers do come, looking for phishing engagements. A lot of times they're not super sophisticated in that we're not going to do like initial access testing where we're going to test every single thing and unit-based test it to get access. Although I think that is a great way to do phishing nowadays, is to see, does it get past email filters, and can I get execution? You break it down to smaller chunks and test it that way, I think is a great way to kind of combat some of this and kind of find out where you're weak and shore up those defenses.
I would imagine that you will have to keep up with the new trends and what adversaries are using currently, because your customers are seeing these reports and maybe they are asking to see whether they are vulnerable in these cases, depending on the technique the threat actors are using.
Yeah.
But yeah,
a lot of it's education, is like educating people on how these attacks work. And the DFIR report is great because it shows exactly how these things are working. And then we can have more educated conversations about how these techniques are working or not working, where we can detect those things and what we need to have in place to kind of prevent some of those things. So things like that are very helpful to kind of have those conversations. And especially when it comes to testing, we can test kind of one-to-one, like we use the same technique and okay, great. We detect these things or we block them and that kind of stuff. So it's good in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you very much. And moving on now to the persistence phase and credential access. For a threat to maintain its foothold for such a long period of time, we noticed they used persistence. Rick, how did the threat actors ensure they remained inside the compromised systems?
Yeah, so I think also people who listen to the podcast about Iced ID it's quite a familiar concept which they used. So in this case, they used a schedule task, which is more a generic approach, I would say, which we encounter a lot. I think also in previous reports, they're very visible. Execution during startup, for example, to make sure that the malicious code they have planted in that regard stays active and does not become inactive if they restart the PC, for example, the computer. They need some kind of way to ensure they keep their access. And in this case, the Iced ID one was pretty standard, I would say. So they used a specific command line example, which most tools would find. So I think also in the report, we touched a bit upon this. The specific license.dat is something that's very familiar for this kind of intrusion. So on a lot of different levels, this could have been detected or was detected. Mm-hmm. What I found more interesting was the second one, which is a different beast, I would say, to find, and that was the usage of AnyDesk. And AnyDesk is a remote management software, which is used a lot, which makes it quite difficult to see, is this normal or not? And I think we might discuss this a couple of times during the report. Like, what is normal for your environment? And this kind of software could definitely be normal. And in this case, the threat actor installed it, likely for easier access than just a command line shell. So I would say the threat actor was able to visually access the machines of the victim, and in this case, AnyDesk was also installed to run as a service, so it would run on startup. It would be accessible all the time, and it was installed in such a way that the victim had no idea. So it was silently installed. It was running in the background. Without specific knowledge, you wouldn't have looked for this. So that were the two main methods.
Thank you for this explanation. Do you feel that it had some unique characteristics in the way that it was installed on the system, or how it created the persistence mechanism? Is there any indicator of which we can choose to search for, even though certain organizations might already using AnyDesk? Is there any way to differentiate this activity from a benign AnyDesk installation?
Yeah, I think there are some indicators to show the way it was installed. I think that's a specific detection opportunity. And this case, it looked like it resembled, if they used some kind of script, and this script was mimicking the Conti TTP. So this basically meant that at some point the Conti inside documents got leaked, and they also leaked some scripts on how they installed AnyDesk and how they used AnyDesk within their targeted environment. So in this case, we noticed that basically the script 90% resembled the Conti installer, which in normal organization which allows AnyDesk, I would say it doesn't get silently installed. It gets pushed from the central repository, or a user might install it, definitely not in a silent way. So I think although the usage, once it has been installed, might be hard to differentiate, especially capturing the beginning on how it is installed might yield more clues in terms of its legitimate or illegitimate usage.
Yeah, as you very well pointed out, it was installed using the silent parameter for a silent installation, which would indicate a non-interactive way of installing AnyDesk. And also, I think upon installation, they used a set password parameter and entered explicitly the password that they wanted to use for that installation. I think this activity started from a batch script as well. Maybe people would like to look into that as the start of an AnyDesk installation. It might not say a lot, but if you bundle it together with everything else that we just mentioned, such as the set password and the silent installation, it will give you a better idea and help you baseline the activity in your environment. Yeah, that was very interesting. And to go back a little bit for the iced ID, I think iced ID has always been using the same method of persistence, using a scheduled task. I think it is loading the license.dat file from the local temp directory, which is the encoded version of the second stage that later gets loaded into memory by the first stage. So that license.dat has always been present, and the naming convention hasn't changed. And I think it serves as a good indicator for looking into suspicious execution, or specifically for the iced ID payload. Moving on now to the discovery phase. After those silent weeks, the discovery phase kicked in there. Alex, the use of standard living of the land tools for reconnaissance is as old as time itself, as is the regular execution of a defined through a batch script that we see in this case. From a defender's perspective, is there a way we can distinguish between the legitimate and malicious reconnaissance that threat actors used in this case?
Definitely. I think generally on the iced ID end, just as it's used the same means of persistence for a long time, it typically uses the same set of commands for discovery, and those commands are generally run sequentially, one after the other, really quickly. So generally not at the speed that a human will type and execute commands. And I think in general, later stages, we saw discovery being conducted via Cobalt Strike, via RDP, and as you mentioned, being executed from multiple different batch scripts. I think in those cases, it's environment specific. So there may be system administrators using various different batch scripts, but it's up to the folks working within the environment to understand if that's normal or not. But yeah, generally, you mentioned 80.bat. It's in my eyes, it would be a red flag since we just always see it in multiple different reports.
Yeah, for sure. It's up to us as defenders to make sure that we are familiar with the environment that we are defending and baseline those things in order to pick out the malicious executions, for sure. And as you said with the bad scripts, I think Rick brought it up with the Condileaks. I think, and maybe I am wrong in this, but I am pretty sure the names of the bad scripts, including the commands and everything, was one-to-one with what we saw in the Condileaks. I'm not 100% sure though, but I'm pretty sure I remember ns.bat and some other names that they used that derived from this type of documentation. If I'm wrong, please correct me here, but yeah, Rick, anything you'd like to add here?
No, I think you're totally correct, and everyone who will see the report would definitely notice the similarity. But one thing that I noticed during this part is that there's one separate command which transports the AnyDesk ID back to the attacker, which appears to be done in a separate script instead of how the Conti gang did it back in the time. So it was kind of strange to me to like, okay, why would that one command not work? And I'm still a bit confused about it. So maybe someone who saw it can tell me why. I'm still not sure about it, but yeah, I think it's definitely the same script, at least as inspiration.
This concludes the first part of this episode. Stay tuned for part 2. Thank you for listening.